Thank you everybody for coming on behalf of Rhodes 19 Fleet 5. Welcome. My name is Kim Pandapis. Every spring, the Rhodes class tries to do something to get us all tuned up and ready to go. And we had the idea of trying to get these guys together. And when they all agreed, it just struck us that this is too good to just keep the Fleet 5. So we invited all of you, and thank you very much for coming. So, this group of panelists probably needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce them anyway. Between them, they've won more than 20 National One Design Championships and 5 world titles. That's astonishing. Judd Smith of Doyle Sailmakers, 6-time Etchells North American champion, world champion in Etchells, IODs, and Mump 30s. He was the main trimmer on Dennis Connor's 1995 America's Cup campaign. Rolex Yachtman of the Year 3 years ago. And probably his most impressive accomplishment was he won the Rhodes 19 National Championship. Throwing out a 2. Jack Slattery of North Sales has a reputation for being a very accomplished big boat sailor, and in fact he is. He's won 5 Newport Bermuda races, 2 Marblehead to Halifax races, 4 Key West Race Weeks, World Cup. But he's also a very accomplished small boat sailor. He's a 2-time College All-American, 6-time Interclub National Championship, 5-time 110 National Champion, and he's won the Mallard Cup. Bill Wynn is one of the top amateur sailors around. He's a 2-time Sonar North American champion. He's also won the Sonar World, so he's a world champion as well, 2-time College All-American, and he also does some big boat sailing. He's a tactician, occasional helmsman on a Transpac 52. He's also been doing some sailing with Judd, I understand. So this is a tremendous group of guys, and so the format tonight is we're going to walk you through a race. From the starting sequence, or just before the starting sequence, through the finish. We're going to try to keep it to about 60 minutes. It'll probably go a little over. I'm going to ask the question. One of these guys is going to answer it. Then I'm going to ask a follow-up question, or they're going to ask questions of each other. We're going to try to have a Q&A session at the end. I invite you guys to hold your questions till then so that we can try to get around the race course. So with that, I'm going to hand over the microphone. The first question. The first question is, so how do you approach the start? What are your priorities on the T-minus 10 minutes as you're sailing around the starting area, getting ready to start the race? What do you think? What's on your checklist? Judd, you want to take it first?
Okay, everybody hear me all right? Okay, 10 minutes before the start. I mean, obviously, hopefully, you're out there soon enough, and before 10 minutes, you've done all the boat speed stuff that you want to do. You've got the right sails up, and you think your tuning's right. I do all that stuff prior to 10 minutes. So, 10 minutes before the start, all your emphasis should go on preparing for the race, studying the wind and wind shots. You've kind of been doing that all along anyhow. But I would say that period of time just before doing, especially on one design races, doing line sights. In a big boat, you're like painting the weather end of the board end. It's all about the starting line. You kind of what you want to do in that first 5 minutes of the race, and talking over with the crew what you want to do. So I would say I get out of, I feel like 10 minutes I am what I am for boat speed. We are what we are. And you're not going to be what you're going to be. You kind of, other than you can change the gears, you're probably pretty much picked your headsail. You might, get it up. You've got a couple of minutes to go or something where you can pick up a big boat headsail. You might say, okay, we've got 2 on the deck, we can pick one. But the bottom line is you kind of are what you are. You might have a last up to 5-minute or 4-minute gun. You got a chance to change your tuning on some of these big boats. But, in Etchells, a lot of classes, you can't change your tuning during the race. It is a time when I almost like to put different people in charge of that and just say, you guys sort that out. But it's really important to focus on the race, those racing decisions, like which end the lines favor, what the current play is, what we think the wind's going to do, the line section, get a good start, a basic strategy, just kind of reviewing all those things. So that's my basic plan, is make sure in 10 minutes I'm kind of into that mode more than the boat speed mode.
Bill, as you're preparing to start and you're looking at some of these things, how do you go about developing what you're going to do in the first 5 minutes?
I think we spend, the first gun's at like 5 minutes, so between 10 and 5 minutes. I actually have had the opportunity to sail with Judd a couple of times this winter in Etchells, and actually he takes a nap at 10 minutes. Yeah, it's beer, and then we wake him up at 5. The time between about 10 minutes and 5 minutes, as Judd said, you are what you are. You're not going to get any faster at that point. So what we generally spend most of our time doing is sort of looking up the wind. I think that some people make the mistake of not spending up time kind of looking up the racetrack and trying to figure out what breeze is doing, because you kind of have an idea of what you think it's doing, but in the last 5 minutes things could change. And if you just have somebody stand up, what we typically do is have somebody just stand up on top of the cabin on the sonar or on the Etchells and just look up, or even stand on the boom. Sometimes on the J105, when I'm sailing with Lori, I'll climb up on top of the boom and just look upwind, because you get the higher your vantage point, the more the puffs and the more the beat you can see. So we'll typically try to spend as much time figuring out what you want to do, to your point, during the first 5 minutes of the race. What do you want to start thinking about when you come off the line?
Jack, how do you decide where to position yourself on the starting line?
Well, at the start, I always have a game plan ahead of time. What I try to do before the start is we try to get ourselves set up. I still big boats a lot now, but before it was things. But now I try to have the boat prepared and ready to go at about. I always have the head sail up at about 7 or 8 minutes. 7 is late, and then we're actually positioning the boat from 12 minutes before the start onward a lot of the time. But at 8 minutes, I'm already actually on my final approach a lot of the time. I already know which way I'm going. So it's really good to actually think about which way you're headed and why you're headed that way. Because from 8 minutes on, you actually have to get the boat in a certain position. So it's very good to think of that ahead of time. If you're sailing a smaller boat where you only have 5 minutes to go before the start, or 3 minutes, then the most important thing is to not ever go very far away from the starting line. You need to be very close. That way, you know which you can get to where you want to be. And you have to be thinking about that at a time. So if you're going to race, you're sailing a small boat race, and you want to start off the right end of the line, the left end of the line, and you kind of want to hang around here with the race committee doing their stuff. So you never want to be caught out of position. So there's no reason to ever really far away.
How do you think about when, say, one end of the line is biased, like let's say it's really pin biased, but everything says you're on one to the right?
Well, in that case, I would start up away from the pin a little bit most of the time. But what happens is you have a game plan at the start. We all do. And what happens is you think that, say, the weather is really favorable, and you really want to start next to the committee boat, but so does everybody else. What you do is you look and see the way the fleet's setting up. And if it looks like they're not doing a very good job setting up for the weather end, you take it. You go, you set up on the lay line and you take the start. If it looks like there's too many boats there and there's no way it's going to work out, you modify your game plan. You start a third of the way down the end of the line, and you might not have the best start. You're going to be second or third best, and so you change it because of what the fleet's doing sometimes. And so it's very important to watch what the boats are doing around you, and it's okay to let the other people push you around sometimes that way. Now, if the leeward end is favored, that's a lot more difficult because the leeward end is really shy. And when you start off with the boat right on your leeward side, really needs to make the boat go fast, and if you have to be a good helmsman, you need to hang in there. So it's really hard when the leeward end is favored. And I know a couple of people in the world that can do that very well, but most people can't, and I'm not one of them.
Hey, Bill, as a member of the Rhodes class, we get to see the sonar start in front of us most of the time on Tinker's Line, and I've never seen a guy more consistently win the boat than I have you. I mean, the boat's always been a tough one for me. How do you do that? How do you win the boat when everyone else wins?
It's a good question. We usually don't start at the boat. If the windward ends favored, we'll start up near it. I don't think, I mean, to Jack's point, I think if there's a favored end, there are maybe two people who are going to get out of there, and it's usually Jack, and so, the rest of us maybe start kind of down the line a little ways where, things probably aren't quite so crowded. And I think we do start relatively consistently, but I think the reason we start relatively consistently is because we don't ever try to own an end. I think that's just, the percentages get real tricky if you try to win the boat. I mean, unless it's so favored that you absolutely have to be there, the goal really is just to get off the line in the front row in a place where you can just sail fast for a while. Because the goal isn't really to win the race off the starting line. The goal is to be in the race off the starting line, to not give the race away off the starting line. And if you can be in a lane where you can sail fast for 3 to 5 minutes, you're going to win the war of attrition. You come off the line at the start, you look around, and there's 25 bows lined up, and it's a dead heat. If you can last there for 2 minutes, you look around, and there's 15 bows. And if you can last for another 2 minutes, you look around, and there's 5. And now, all of a sudden, life looks a little easier.
So, Jack, just a little more on the start. What happens, it probably doesn't happen very often to you, but to someone else it does, if you get a second row start. How does that change your
Well, Jack brought up a really good point. The highest risk start is a lured end start. A bad start at the lured end is basically a last place start. So it's a risky place to start. And anytime I usually start down lured end, and it's times you just have to go do it. And the bigger the fleet is, the bigger the crowd, the more I regret never being anywhere near it. It's better just to hip off a little bit. If you do whereas a bad start at Weatherman is probably a little easier to bail out of, although you bail out to the right's not favored, that's not good either. That's why that middle half quadrant is the best place to start. But if you don't have a good start, and how do you bail out? The bigger the fleet, it's tough if you're selling handicap racing because you get different speed boats. But the larger the fleet, probably in a way it's more challenging because it's more bad air, but you also have to look for your opportunities. Obviously, you're looking for an opportunity to attack. It's not a good idea to kind of just bear off unless you're down in the other end and have to go left. Bear off and take a race, just drive over everybody. But you got to be patient to look for an opportunity to attack. And when you attack, you got to be able to go straight on board. You have to be forced back again. It's okay if you're in a dinghy. Maybe you roll tack and you don't lose anything in attacks. But every other boat I sail, certainly keel boats, you can't tack back. Once you're committed on port, you're pretty much either ducking or crossing, or ducking or crossing or footing. You don't want to have to tack back with the starboard until you're clear. And once you do, you're dead. And if you stick out port and you get what I call the slingshot, you have to be patient. So the first thing when I'm doing, I think I did in the first race of the Nationals, I remember, up in Rockport. I had a crappy start, I hadn't sailed a boat in a while. And my wife and daughter were sailing with me, and my wife was a ton of confidence in me, said, "Oh my God, we're last." And I'm like, just relax, everything's fine. So we put our bow down and just, and I said, okay, I screwed it up, just relax. And my daughter was supportive, but pretty much agreed with her. But we put our bow down, and first you just got to get your boat going. You can't sit there and pinch. I mean, you're sailing behind everybody on starboard, you're in their header, so you got to realize you're in the header, so it looks ugly. You got to sail in the breeze you're in, which is probably 3, 4, 5 degrees lower angle. So you have to have your speed, because if you don't have speed, you can't tack. You come out of the tack with no speed. So when people see me do this, they're like, what is this guy doing? What's he smoking? But you have to be able to have speed. So I just put the bow down because I'm a relative header, because I know I'm going to make it up on the other tack. So you put the bow down, and you get going, and you look over your shoulder, and you wait for the fleet to break up, or an opportunity where you feel you can tack and sail through. And that's a little bit of an art form to figure out when you can do that. And that's, based on just looking at the crowd. The bigger the fleet, the more challenging that is. But you can do it. Once you get the slingshot, you can get out. You get on port, you're on a relative lift. You can absolutely get up to above top speed. and you go flying through, you got to be able to go through straight. You got to know which boats you're clearing. Sometimes you might communicate. But in that race, with my kids and my wife and my daughter, I think we ran the landmark first in that race. And they were like, my daughter's like, how'd you do that? And I'm like, oh, you so little thing. And I think I told my wife and my daughter at the time, I said, well, Mom says we're going to be last. So she set the bar pretty high. So we're going to get on that. So anyhow, it's like you never give up in that scenario because the race is still early. And even though we were down near the pin where I got buried, there's always an opportunity. The best thing is not to get freaked out about it. Is just be calm. Just deal with it. Sailing with Bill, whenever we've been sailing this winter, whenever we're in a bad spot, been in a bad spot, no one gets excited about, and the best way to recover is just go about business as usual.
Before you give up the microphone, in that regatta, I remember one start where there was about 45 seconds left, and you were headwind in the middle of the line, standing in the boat, just looking at. What were you looking at?
Well, that was tricky because of a lot of current. Just hopefully, and I remember it did blow over 5 knots the whole time, so I was just probably looking for any wind whatsoever. So I think you were faster. I thought you were faster, so I better be smart instead of fast.
All right. So, bang, the race has started now. We're going up the course. Jack, assuming you get a decent start, now what? How do you execute your upwind strategy? What are your priorities going forward?
Well, usually we've looked at the race course before the start. Usually I get out to the start no later than 45 minutes before the start. So I can spend the first 25, 30 minutes looking at the race, going up with a weather beat, and maybe putting the spinnaker up so we just kind of shake out the cobwebs from the night before. And then what we do is we've looked at that. We've gotten the wind shifts down, and we decide which side of the course we kind of want to go to, and that's what we try to do. If we had a good start, we sail in the direction we want to go, and I don't spend too much time looking at the other boats except to see if they're doing well. If they're not, I just continue on my game plan and keep on sailing as fast as possible. One thing that's really important is to not really look at the other boats that much. The thing to do is to worry about what you're doing, keeping the boat going fast. So if you've developed a game plan that's going well, you keep on sailing your boat fast. Because sailboat racing is all about eliminating mistakes. What you do is if you make no mistakes, you win the race because everybody else makes a mistake. So your idea is to make as few mistakes as possible, let the other guys make that mistake. And that's what Judd was just talking about when he was not getting excited and stuff like that. Even though they were behind, if they just went and got clear air and they could sail the boat, then they're ready to go off and stop making mistakes. And then they're going to start picking up boats the whole time. And so if you develop a good game plan before the start, you stick with it until the evidence shows that what your game plan was wrong, and then you modify it. You start working in the other direction if you need to. And you might not win that race, but you might bail out and get a fourth or a fifth or something like that. And at the end of the day, that's going to win the regatta if you've made a mistake. That's what I do. It's conservative, but it works.
So Bill, let's say your game plan was to go left, and the rest of the fleet heads off to the right. How do you deal with it?
I think at that point you just protect the left, but you don't want to really split the fleet. I mean, like we were talking about earlier. I mean, the objective on the start and on the first beat is not to necessarily win the race. The objective is to stay in the race. I think the people that win regattas aren't necessarily the people that get a perfect start every time and hit every single shift up the first beat. They're the people that manage to turn adversity into decent races, turn crappy starts into good races. And I think that everybody has a game plan coming off the line. When I sail big boats, I spend a lot of time calling tactics, and I could, everybody's always looking at you 10 minutes before the start, going, "What's the game plan? What's the game plan?" Like, I don't know. But when there's 15 people looking at you, asking you what the game plan is, you got to come up with something. So, sort of make something up real quick. But I think the concept of, if anybody thinks they absolutely know what's going on, what the wind's going to do on the first beat of any race out here, it's like it's like being a weatherman. If you're right 51% of the time, you're doing pretty well, I think. So I think to Jack's point, the idea is to have a game plan, but to be flexible and to understand that your game plan might be wrong. And if it looks like it's going to be, if it looks like it's not working out the way you thought it was going to be, the way you thought it was, then bail. You know, go try to get into the top 10 around the first Woodward mark. Because if you can round the Woodward mark in 8, you're in good shape. I mean, you can sort of work it from there. So to your point, Cam, long answer to a short question. I think that if you think the breeze is going left, but the whole fleet's going right, then just protect the left side and stay with the fleet.
Judd, any tricks to lane management as you get up the course a bit and boats start to convert?
Yeah, I mean, protecting lanes in a big fleet is important. Any size fleet, you've got to have a clear area. You're obviously looking for a place to attack. You don't want to get forced out on the lane line, have to sail in a dirty air all the time, ideally. And so, yeah, you're looking for opportunities to send around with the fleet, especially if you can consolidate on a majority of the fleet. If you get to the top mark in the top 20%, that's your goal. If you can do it in clear air, that's fine. And the hardest part of the beat is that last third of the beat, especially in a big fleet. If you're back a little bit, you're in the cone of bad air, you got the guys going down the offset leg, you got the spenders going up, So that's a challenging thing. Sometimes in the middle, the cone of bad air can be bad in the middle. So you got to be careful about the middle. It can be death sometimes, and maybe it's this type of course where there's both sides pay, and that's a killer if you play too conservative and you get had by both sides. This has happened to me a lot. It's happened to all of us. So it's a judgment call, but obviously you try to pick the lanes. It's clean the lane. You try to give yourself a chance. So if you think there's someone 2 or 3 boats in front of you that could tack on you, you got to be the first one to go. And with the idea that I usually say, okay, well, we got to go now, and we're probably going to get tacked on, but if we don't do it, we'll pay later. So that's the plan. Obviously, you look for opportunities just to not get crushed.
Is there any particular place that you go, if you have a microphone, like to position yourself as you're starting to get up to the mark?
Yeah, I think that when you are not winning or you're not in the top 5, that's where it gets tricky. I mean, when you're in the top 5, it's all easy. You can see the breeze, you can tack where you want to tack, and everything's cool. But when you're a little ways back, it gets a little tricky. And I think the whole secret is to minimize the damage, to minimize the amount of distance that you lose to the guy who's winning the race. And so the corners are tough. If you get out to a ley line too early, it's going to be hard because you're going to end up getting tacked on a lot. You're probably going to end up overstanding. So what we usually try to do when we're behind is not get out to a ley line too early. Now, to Judd's point, at Marblehead, a lot of times, even if you pick the wrong corner, it's still better than going up the middle. So there's that risk. It never works out perfectly. But I think to the extent that you can try to keep your options open, the closer you get to the top of that cone, the better off you're going to be.
Jack, any words of wisdom for those of us that find ourselves kind of on the left ley line approaching the wall of boats coming in on starboard? How to get around that?
Well, actually, it's one of my favorite maneuvers. Coming on the starboard ley line, I agree with both Judd and Billy. I like to, depending on the size of the race course, I like to tack as much as a quarter of a mile to leeward of the ley line from behind. And if it's a smaller race, like here in Marblehead, it might be 100 yards to leeward the ley line. And I know that the boats are likely to cross me, they're in front of me, and they're likely to get out, and I'm likely to have a clear lane until I get really close to the mark. And I might get as close as 100 yards to the mark, and the boats might start piling up, and then that spot 100 yards to leeward the ley line will not become so good anymore because the breeze might just get covered in at that point. But as long as you can hang in that leeward spot coming in on the starboard ley line, as long as you have clear air, you can hang there forever. You can take it all the way up to the port ley line if you want to. Now, on the port ley line, I often like to get all the way out to the ley line and even a bow length or two past it. because I find that people coming up in the middle of the course won't want to go that far. They feel like you've got too much leverage and they don't want to do that. And so if you've gotten behind and you get out to the port side, you can actually get out to the side of the course. And people, I find boats are very reluctant to get out to the port side because I think they're worried about the weather mark a lot of the time. And so the real crux of the issue at the end is that you are looking great all of a sudden because nobody's tacked on you, but there's 5 or 6 boats coming around the mark and they're headed straight at your face. And so you have to, have the nerves of steel and you have to work your way through that. And normally, a lot of the times, the real problem is the boat's coming straight at you because Judd was talking last night at the Boston Yacht Club, and what happens is the boats coming around the weather mark are actually on a reciprocal course to you, upwind and downwind. In fact, it turns out that their course is exactly opposite most of the time in most breezes. And so, if you're a boat length or 2 above them, that's okay, but you have to dive through them at some point. And then, or be right on their course. I mean, if you pick the right ley line, you're right there on their course. And so, they're the boats you really have to worry about a lot of the time. Trying to find a spot at the weather mark, if you're within 2 or 3 boat lengths of the mark, and you tack in, you have to tack in clearly. If you don't do it right, it's not worth trying to do it, and you've got to duck whatever you have to duck. You just have to do it. It's not worth trying to tack in. What happens is you hope that a lot of other boats are not coming in from the port side. Usually that's the case. If a lot of boats start doing that over the course of a regatta, then that's no longer a valid tactic anymore. But normally in most regattas it works. But if you end up in a situation where people are coming in on the port side as much as the starboard side after a while because they get desperate and learn, hey, these guys coming in from the port side are doing really well, people will pick up on that. They're not stupid. And but that will take a long time over the course of a regatta. But normally you can get in, but you do not want to tack in the last couple of boat lengths to a mark just underneath anybody unless you really are clear. Because you will foul them and you will cause problems. And it's much faster to say, oh well, I did pretty well. I caught up several boats. I may have to give them back here, but I'm maybe right behind them around the mark. It's much better to dive behind them, tack, and just come in right behind them, and you're still right with that line of boats. You're still right with them. You may have given up some distance, but you're still right with those boats. So it's not good to tack in at the last second if you don't have space, and you have to give it back again. That's the problem with that maneuver. But usually, I'd say 2/3 of the time you can get a spot to tack in.
Judd, at what point do you start thinking about downwind strategy as you're
Well, the first thing to think about going downwind is what's your last shift coming to the mark? Are you going to port lift or starboard lift? Or port lift or starboard lift? Because that'll be more or less the shift you're looking at and then initially in the run. And then the next thing you talk about is, okay, what side is there more pressure on one side or another? Because as much as shift makes a difference downwind, I think pressure makes a bigger difference on most boats. So the pressure will win out over the shift downwind, probably more so than upwind, because boats are speed sensitive. There's bigger gains to be made with pressure. There's not a big difference upwind with speed because of the apparent wind, but the apparent wind can change rapidly with velocity downwind. Your speed can affect the speed. So pressure is probably more important than shift, and generally you don't end up jiving necessarily as much as you tack. I know maybe that's a mistake because you probably lose less in a jive than you do a tack. But in a way, downwind there's less lanes of pressure. You've got to give yourself a little more room downwind because of bad air's worse. So I think there's harder decisions to make downwind because you need a leg to sail in with clear air and you want to be in the best pressure. So it's a real judgment call at first, and I really think that's when the tacticians really matter. And that's why Bill and I sailed this program together in San Diego. If one of us is flying the chute or something like that, the other one could be looking around. Because that's probably one of the most critical decisions in the race, is because if you consider the first beat, you survive the first beat, you're in the top 20%, then that decision you make out of the first minute or two out of the mark, whether it's a jive right away, or we go boat length, 5 boat lengths to jive, or we carry on, or we let the pressure here, or we can't jive in the cone yet, all that stuff. That's the most critical decision you'll make that pretty much decides whether you're going to lose 2 or 3 boats or whether you're going to gain 2 or 3 boats.
Does how you approach the marker hunting and going into the downwind leg change if there is an offset mark or if you're behind traffic? I mean, how do you kind of deal with those?
The offset mark is just to help avoid collisions. It almost makes the cone of bad air worse. So I would say it makes the downwind leg almost more complicated to have the offset than it does without it because the cones of bad air is worse. I think we did the Jack series where we had this very good PRO that decided he wanted to reinvent the wheel. He had a Wimmer gate, and I don't know if any of you were here to witness that, but that was a complete disaster. The cone of bad air then went from a quarter mile wide to a mile wide. So there was no escaping the cone of bad air. The fleet would separate and basically be on ley lines immediately. So that was a very failed experiment. Unfortunately, we kind of got over that. But so I would say the offset makes things harder than easier. And the offset's in there to help avoid collisions. And it's probably a good idea.
Hey, Bill, as you're going down, let's say you didn't have a brake first leg, and there's a lot of boats in front of you. What's your approach to picking off boats as you're going down? Assuming the guys in front of you have picked the right side of the course and the side of the course in front of you. Are you following them? Are you splitting from them? How do you approach that?
You seem to be answering all the questions about not having a great first leg. But that's okay, because I'm used to it. I think that it really, I mean, I keep sort of harping on this theme. I think that, and it's really kind of governs everything we try to do on the racetrack. It's about, if you're behind, it's really about minimizing damage and trying to not worry necessarily about the boats around you, but worry about how far behind the leader you are. You want to try to stay within striking distance of the front group that's in the top 5 of the race. And so from that perspective, the top of the beat, the offset leg, the beginning of the run, all are incredibly critical. I mean, there are so many people that kind of go around the leeward mark and sail the offset leg with their jib luffing or their main overtrimmed or, that kind of stuff. I mean, the number of times you actually get to the leeward mark and just miss getting an overlap on a boat or 2 boats or 3 boats or a whole pack of boats that you miss getting the overlap on by a quarter of a boat length or half a boat length. I mean, trace that all the way back to the offset leg in the beginning of the run. If you do that a little differently, you have that overlap on those 5 boats. So sailing the offset leg as fast as you possibly can, trimming your sails right, for that leg, and making sure that when you go around the first windward mark, when you set, that you don't sail high because there's a bunch of boats around you that are all sailing high. That you don't, get caught underneath the cone, as Judd said. You really just want to focus, instead of the boats around you, just worry about trying to get to the leeward mark as fast as you can, because you can gain a lot by just sailing fast down the run.
How do you deal with it when there's a boat that's trying to engage with you, and so they're doing that, and the rest of the fleet is sailing down the course? I mean, we approach it by yelling at them.
Yeah.
Those guys are sailing down the course.
Yeah. That always works. That's hard. I mean, it's if somebody really, really, really wants to roll you, they're going to make your life miserable. And if you engage with them, then you're just going to lose more and more distance to the guys to the people who are winning. It was funny. I was sailing. Robbie Doyle was sailing with me in the Jackson Cup last weekend, or the weekend before, I guess. And he was telling me that when he used to frostbite in interclubs against John Pratt, if you tried to go over Pratt, he would basically just take you head to win. And that was his thing. He was just like, I have to train people. I'm out here training everybody that if they ever try to go over top of me, I'm just going to take them to the moon. And so, just completely sacrificing that race. But over the course of many years, Pratt probably trained everybody out there that they shouldn't try to roll. So if you're willing to invest that kind of time, then, you can do that. Oh, let's see, what's the Lifetime Achievement Award for keeping people from going over? So that's one way to do it, but that's probably not the way I'd recommend doing it. I think, yelling is one way. I think, we just sort of try to stay low. I mean, sometimes we'll just give up, because it's fun. It's, if you want to go over, you go over, but we're all just trying to get down the run. And especially if someone's trying to get over top of you, especially if there's a gate, they're not necessarily gonna, they may win the battle, but they won't win the war. And the trick is winning the war.
Okay, great. Just a brief note before we continue. I was just told that a bunch of folks parked in the grocery store parking lot next door, and the grocery store is not particularly pleased about that, and they're starting to threaten to call the tow truck. So if you park over there, you might want to go move your car. So before we get to the lured mark, this is more of a kind of boat handling, sales handling question, but this is for anyone who wants to answer it. But assuming the air is fresh and pulling 20 or 25 or something like that, any tricks to controlling the boat downwind under those kinds of circumstances? Jack, what do you think?
Do you mean jiving or?
Well, putting up the chute in heavy air, driving in heavy air. I mean, it's a.
Well, controlling the boat in heavy air downwind is it's actually counterintuitive. The whole thing, you put more force on the sails and put more bang on. You do everything that you would think may not be good. But the big thing about jiving downwind in heavy air is if you can set it up, is you get on the ride of your life, and while you're thinking, oh my God, this is the greatest ride I've ever had in my life, you jive because there's no wind in the sails, and so it's really easy. And so instead of getting all tense, going, oh my God, this is blowing really hard here, you go, okay, we need to get this boat going really, really fast, and we get going really fast through. We're going to jive the boat. Everybody's going to look back and go, you're crazy, but actually, that's the time to make the maneuver. And a lot of times, that's the case. We were talking about the other stuff about going downwind before. The other thing is you don't want boats next to you. And I was thinking about that when these guys were talking before, is that going downwind, Judd talked about bad air. It's more bad air going downwind. And you want to stay away from other boats. So if somebody heads up, it's going a different way, it's almost a good thing. They're trying to roll you. Just let them go. Because if you just want to, if they want to clear away from you that way, let them do it. It's better downwind to be all by yourself. That way you can do whatever you want, whenever you want to do, when it's up, it's a shift, or whatever. Because I found sailing back in college, the best thing to do is to get alone. You didn't have to go off and sit on the edge of the course, but get yourself alone, see the puffs, and get the puff. And if the puff lifts you, you can jog on it. If it doesn't lift you, if it heads you, I mean, I can't see which way the puff's going to take me most of the time. But once it hits me, I can actually decide where it's going and see where it's going and follow it around. Sometimes I follow around. I'll actually follow a puff all the way around the course, like be chasing it downwind, and I'll just let the thing wherever it goes, I'll chase it. But that's what you do. But in heavy air maneuvers, you need to get the boat going fast. And when you're going fast, is when you make the maneuver. Coming into the leeward mark, it's good to come in with angle. Even if it's blowing pretty good, it's best to come in with angle. You can put the bow down, take the spinnaker down early, or if it's lighter, you put the bow down, take the spinnaker down, and then when you come up to the mark, you're coming in with pressure. But if you're coming straight into the mark downwind, you're just going to be sitting there a lot of the time. So it's better to give it a little distance, and even if it's blowing hard, you can put the bow down, get rid of the sail, and then turn up a little bit. But never, you don't want to approach the leeward mark from straight up wind of it, ever, in any breeze, really.
Either of you guys have any other tricks for controlling the boat down in heavy air?
I think, I don't know how many folks here sail boats with asymmetrical spinnakers, but I think that one of the coolest moves is with an A-sail. It's the late main jibe, and it's really one of the only ways to keep a boat with an A-sail under control on a jibe in heavy air. And the whole trick is really just to jibe the spinnaker first, so you kind of turn the boat downwind, jibe the spinnaker so it actually fills. So you look like you're sailing downwind, kind of wing and wing, and then you sort of roll into the jibe. The main sort of goes across on its own, and it just sort of everything's cool. You know, it's just a great way to jibe. When you do it right, it feels perfect, and it's completely under control.
Same thing works with the symmetrical spinnaker. If you have a hard time getting the main across, don't even worry about it. Deal with the spinnaker. You move the pole to the leeward side, get the whole thing set up, and turn the boat onto the new course, and you let the main come across. it's a little bit of a nuance, but if you turn the boat a lot and the main starts coming across, there's an S turn you do in heavy air, where you actually turn the boat fully over for a jog, and as the main's coming across, you turn it back downwind again. That way when it hits, it doesn't roll the boat over. And the S turn is very common in any size boat, especially dinghies, because otherwise they roll over. The bigger boats, that's what helps avoid a approach on the jog. But it does help to move this. Really had a good point there with the asymmetrical. It works also with the symmetrical spinnaker as well when it's blowing hard.
Judd, how do you think about dealing with more dark surrounding the ones that are gates?
Well, gates work if the gates are square. If the gates aren't squared away like a starting line, the gates are ineffective. Everybody will figure out which is the correct gate. So ideally, if the committee sets the gates square, it makes for a much more competitive race because it gives the boats from behind a chance to change gates or go the other way. It's hard for the leader to defend that. The leader's got to finally pick whatever gate they want to go and what side of the fleet they want to go on. When you're in a big fleet with a gate, you got to realize that you're probably going to be on that tack. You're going on the left gate, you're going to be put back for a little while of letting the fleet to get away from the bad air. And if you're going on the right gate, you're going to be in starboard tack for a little while. A lot can happen, and a lot of separation can happen in that short little period of time while you're waiting for an opportunity to attack and cross back the other way. A lot of damage can happen, a lot of damage can get done. So picking a gate is challenging even if they're square because it will set you up going either left or right, whether you like it or not, especially in a big fleet. So that sometimes is the biggest issue. I think Bill and I sailed one of these winter regattas, and I think just by the ability of crossing one guy by inches, I think it was a few feet, and being able to go to the left gate as opposed to the right gate was the difference between probably first and fifth in that race, just by being able to get to the left gate, which I wasn't sure we were going to do, and Bill's like, we got it. And that's why you have a lot of good eyes on the boat. And the other thing is not on the gate is not just in general about downwind. Don't commit to a gate. There's two problems that happen with gates. One is you monkey in the middle and you can't get to either gate. So that's if you're coming in a crowd, in which case you got to kind of start working one of your sides for better or worse. Or on the left, we're going to the left gate because there's 10, 15 boats to the right of us, so we don't have a chance at the other gate. That's problem one. And hopefully, you make that work. You have no choice. But if you do have a choice, and you don't know, then I basically give myself all options. In other words, I don't get off to one ley line or another. You basically have an option so we can change gates at the last minute. If the gates are placed properly, I know there's some PROs here, the gates aren't too far apart. Now the rules have changed a little bit. It used to be 2 boat lengths, now it's 3 boat lengths rule. But the gates shouldn't be more than, 6.5, 7 boat lengths to 8 boat lengths apart, and of the average size boat racing in that line. And if they're further apart than that, that's not good, because the ideal thing when you come in a boat and you have an ability to shift gates, you go to either gate. So you can take the pole away, and the spinner can come down either side, and oftentimes in a big boat, you can say, I'm not sure what gate it's going to be, I'm not even sure, we're going to pull the spinner down the side, and we could go to either gate. We'll decide at the last minute. You just want to obviously give yourself options. The other thing that can happen downwind is as the velocity increases, you get to ley line very quickly. So you got to be careful not to, unlike upwind, it depends on when you're a symmetrical boat. If the velocity is high, you can very quickly get to ley lines. So if you get puffed in a shift, then you'll be on ley line and be overstood. So it's really easy to overstand downwind. So you got to be cautious not only about what Jack's talking about that clear air scenario and sailing yourself, which I agree with. It's very hard, but not get caught out ley lines. You can lose more by overstanding on a run than any single factor on a run, by overstanding either left or right.
Do you have a trick for following the ley line? I think it's almost All right, so what happens to a lot of us as we're rounding the mark is that we haven't played it exactly right, and we end up not inside. We end up outside the pinwheel. There's two things you can do there. One, you can sail deep, or the other, you can tack. I mean, how do you guys deal with that?
I think you have to avoid being on the outside of the pinwheel at all costs. You just can't do it. You can't put yourself there. And do whatever you have to do to not be there. Even if it's bail at the last minute, go to the other gate. Just wait, go slow. Get to the 3 boat length zone. And now that the zone's 3 lengths, it's actually a lot easier, because when it was 2 lengths, it was easy to get outside the zone. If you were sort of waiting your turn to round the mark, bow stern with a couple of boats, all it took was 2 boats. To be, one guy's bows at the mark, and the other guy's bow stern with him, and you're outside the 2 boat length circle, and anybody coming downwind now has buoy room on you. With 3 lengths, you have a lot bigger cushion to play with. So just make sure that you round on the next boat's transom, not to leeward. Don't get your bow caught to leeward, because you want to be able to sail. Often, the guy right in front of you will be in somebody else's bad air, and he'll tack away and leave you a nice little clear lane. It'll leave you a nice little clear lane to build speed. And if you have to tack, you have to tack. But especially with a gate, especially if you're doing okay in the race, you really don't want to tack right away. It's a mess. Going back across the middle of that, there's a lot of boats coming downwind. Even if there's not a lot of boats coming downwind, there's a lot of chop, and there's crappy air in the middle. So whatever you gained on the run, you don't want to give away right away. So if you can avoid tacking, you want to avoid tacking, but you definitely don't want to be on the outside of the pinwheel.
While you have the mic, so you run in first place, and you've got a whole gaggle of boats behind you, and they split. How do you defend against that as you're heading back up the beach?
Well, that's where the game plan comes into play. You can't cover everybody, and the biggest mistake, especially when it's shifty, is I think you try to cover everybody, and it's hard to do. You really have to have a game plan, figure out which side of the course you want to defend, and just defend that side. If you try to herd everybody all the time, you can end up tacking too much. You can end up missing shifts. And, we've all been there, and you get around a leeward mark first, and all of a sudden there's guys like boats nipping at your heels when you're just trying to stretch out on them. And the easiest way to stretch out on them is just to make sure you stay in phase, and make sure you defend the side of the course that you think you need to defend, so you don't end up attacking too much.
Either of you other guys have any tricks for picking up boats as you're heading upwind? Let's say, Jack, that you didn't get that good mark rounding, and there's 4 or 5 boats in front of you. How do you catch them?
Well, I get clear air as fast as I can without doing something, stupid, tacking into a big chop or something like that. I look for my easiest opportunity to get clear air without slowing the boat down. I go for that. And then, once I'm free to do what I want to do, I don't look at the other boats that much. I look at them to see what's going on in the race course, like I said before. But I stick to my game plan, and I just sail the best I can, very methodically, and just take them off one at a time. If I need to pick up all 5 boats, it may be impossible. And so you don't want to risk it all, unless you absolutely have to. If you're way behind, you can just stick it out to a corner. But normally what you do is you stick with your abilities, you do the best you can, and you let the other people make mistakes. And so you just keep on pushing along. And if you're methodical about it, it's brutally efficient. You just keep on working at it, and you'll eventually get to where you want to be. You may not get all 5 boats, but you might get 2 of them, and that makes a big difference.
Judd, I asked you this question one time, and your answer was something along the lines of you just have to keep engaging them. What did you mean by that? Engaging them.
Oh, I see. Yeah, what I probably meant by engaging is mix it up. I mean, you're not going to pass people, especially in the final beat, if you just let them be satisfied with being between you and the web and where you're in the goal. So, if you're behind, you might as well try attacking, and you might have better jives and better tacks and fool them. You tack if you're in a lift, you tack a lift, and they might tack and stay on it too long, so you can flip back on. You'll still be in the lift. You can tack them and put someone into someone else's bad air. You can trap them. They put them in a tack them in a place where they might have to tack and be in someone's gas, and you won't be in their gas. So you just keep trying stuff, and like what Jack said, you just keep chipping away in tricep doesn't mean it always works, but nothing ventured, nothing gained. So that's nothing.
So we're on the last beat. We're approaching the finish line. Any thoughts about the best way to position yourself for an upward finish in terms of how to kind of position yourself for the finish?
I mean, I think there's two things to think about. One is which end of the line is favored. I think it's a part of the race where some people who aren't necessarily in the top five kind of take their foot off the accelerator a little bit. And I think if you think about any regatta, like a golf tournament, it's easy to, on Thursday you watch these golf tournaments and, these guys will, three putt, a hole, and all of a sudden on Sunday that extra putt cost them $500,000. I mean, I think that in a sailboat race, every boat counts, and it's important to remember that, especially in a regatta. And at the end of the race, you want to get every boat you can, every single boat you can, even if you just have to get, the guy in front of you or one of the boat. It always ends up mattering. I mean, you sit there lying awake on Sunday night going, I lost that regatta by a point, because I didn't get that one boat finish, and I probably could attack across or covered better or whatever. But the important thing, I think, in the last quarter of the beat going into the finish is just to make sure that you maintain your focus, you keep your foot on the accelerator.
Jack, how about now?
I agree completely with what Billy was saying. The real key to a whole weekend of sailing or a longer regatta is, you're out there. This is what you're doing for this period of time in your life that you decide to spend. And not all of us are as serious as others, but while you're doing this one thing, this competition, the whole time you're out there, you owe it to yourself to put the effort in all the way from start to finish. Because if you're not going to do it the best you can, then it's kind of a waste a little bit. And so it's really important. It's sort of like there was that old book, what was the Game of Inner Tennis or something like that. And the deal is that you need to think inside yourself and say, am I out here to enjoy myself? Of course I am. But you also have to say, do I want to do as well as possible? I'm in a competition. And so what you have to do is you have to just keep on saying to yourself, I'm here to do as best as I can. And so what we're talking about all comes around that stuff. It's like you just got to keep on pushing all the time. You got to concentrate. And that way, on Wednesday, you think back on the weekend, you go, I was trying as hard as I could. I might have lost that boat, but it wasn't because I wasn't trying enough. And that's a really, really important thing. That really helps a lot. It's really good to keep on pushing yourself and thinking about the reason why you're out there all the time. It makes a big difference at the end of a regatta. It does. And that's a big point. Now coming into the finish line on a lured finish line, I try to come in. I try to pick it's the same thing as the weather finish. What you want to do, weather finish, lured finish, is one thing that I forget half the time. I think a lot of us do, is we forget to look and to see which end of the line is favored. There's a point in the race where you can actually see that, but all of a sudden you're approaching the finish line. You have no idea which end of the line is favored because you never looked. And so it's really kind of important to remember that whole thing. And then as you approach the finish line, whether it's swim or lured, you have a pretty good idea of which one's going to, might be able to have a chance to pick off a couple of boats because you've looked. And strangely enough, I still forget that a lot of the time. It's not that easy to remember that a lot of times. You have a lot of other stuff going on. And then you try to position yourself to go for that favorite end of the line in the direction you think is going to be best. I mean, I'm not going to say much more than that, but that's important, is to don't forget to look at some point as to which end is favored. And the same thing with the gate, the lure gate. You've got to check that out. If you had a chance when you're going up the first beat to find out, you might be able to do that. Sometimes you can ahead of time, but it's important.
Judd, in this situation where going downwind, let's say you're on starboard drive, there's a boat inside you, sort of on your left hip, and you're just slightly above the farm. You're going to have to either sail deep and slow, possibly lose some boats or jive, and you're not going to be able to do that until he does it. How do you think about that type of a situation? I mean, how do you make sure that guy doesn't get you when you finish?
And it's a tough thing. One thing for sure is you can't get too greedy. You got to keep sealing your polar angles. You always got to seal your optimum angle downwind. I think people lose that plot about the optimum angle. But if you're on a spinnaker boat, your trimmer can probably feel your angle more than anything. Remember, I think those were there tonight. I mean, last night, the proper angles downwind most of the time are the reciprocal, the upwind headings. It's such a hard thing to get the angle right, and whatever boat it is, it's only a degree or two, just like upwind. Makes all the difference in the world on speed. So not only the helmsman in a sense, but the trimmer's always got to be communicating, because the trimmers can feel it first of what the right angles. Speed is the most important thing, because you can't go slow. Even though you can shoot the finish line at the end, you can't go slow. The most important thing is keeping slow. The next important thing is keeping your air clear. Now you can attack. Attacking is not a bad thing if you've got good boat handling, roll jives, anything like that. You can make a couple maneuvers. You can say, well, we can discuss, let's take a step over here. Maybe we give him a little bit of gas for that last, couple of minutes in, and maybe that will be enough. And push him off. The other thing, if you have starboard advantage, you can use that at the end, to step over and attack someone. If you've got a boat coming on port, when you're on starboard, you can bow up a little bit and force them over to jibe yourself. So I think the biggest thing about downwind is going fast, staying under pressure, good boat handle, keep your air clear, and then all the good things start coming out of that, and vice versa. If you don't do all those things, everything turns pretty bad.
One more situation is going downwind. You're on the left side of the course, and there's a line of you, and you're waiting to jibe. You hit the lay line to the finish line. You want to go in, and then everyone jives above you. How do you keep your air clear in that situation?
It's pretty hard to keep your air clear in that situation. I think if you back it up a few lengths, it's tough. I mean, when you're going into the finish line and somebody's set up on your leeward hip and you're not laying the finish line, you're a sitting duck. And if it's somebody behind you who wants your spot, they're going to be able to take it. And I think that's the right way to think about the final run to the finish. Is if you're within 3 boat lengths of somebody in front of you, then you need to want their spot. And you can get it because you're in control if you're behind. If you are that guy who's ahead and somebody is set up on your leeward hip like that, there's a lot of different ways to think about it, but I think one way is to just jibe early. It's going to jibe on you, either way. But at least then you've left yourself room to go back to the left. That boat may jibe on you and then roll you, but if you've left yourself room to jibe back on the port to get to the finish line, then you're in control. Now they've rolled you, but you're on their leeward hip, on starboard jibe, right? So now you're sort of in control. And sometimes you have to just accept the fact that you're going to get jibed on, and so don't leave it until you get to the starboard tackling line. Do it early. Leave yourself room to get away to the left.
So we've hit the point where we've sailed from the starting line all around a couple of legs to the finish line. I've been asking questions for a while. At this point, I want to open it up to you guys and see if you have any questions. Please.
Just some questions about making sure that you're keeping your crew's heads in the game and how you handle keeping crews in sync when you're going through actions. I think everybody has gone through that. Not the best.
I guess I did. I think that anytime you're sailing with people who are relatively new, it's hard because you need to just kind of make sure that everybody knows what they're going to do, and you need to spend as much time before the race practicing as you can. I think that I read something recently by a guy who wrote about a J-24 regatta that he sailed in, and his whole thing was all he wanted from the guys who were sailing with him was input. and he said, just talk to me, just keep talking to me. And if your input sucks, I'll tell you. I'll tell you to shut up. But just keep talking to me. And I think that that is for somebody, I mean, I sort of spend probably a little more time driving than I do crewing on boats. And when you're driving, the important thing is to really just be able to focus on driving. There aren't that many people who are good enough to be able to drive and figure out where they want to go and look around and all that good stuff. And so just getting your crew plugged into feeding you the information that you need so that you can just focus on driving the boat is great. As soon as the crew goes quiet, that's when the driver starts looking around. How are we doing? You know, are we fast? Are we slow? So that's the information that has to be coming back from the crew the whole time. How are we going? Fast, slow? Where are we on the race course? How are we doing relative to the people around us? Where are the puffs? All that kind of good stuff.
Any other questions?
Venue specific to Marblehead, the weekend race, how do you differentiate between oscillating conditions and the eventual, usually sea breeze driven progressive change? I have no idea.
That's a loaded question. Yeah, most of the time I'd say you're absolutely right that most of the time it is a persistent shift in Marblehead, which makes it difficult. And plus the other variable in Marblehead, which makes it really challenging, especially the more you're outside towards Tinkers and Half Big Rock, is the current. I guess the current's just everywhere. So the current play, especially the ebb out of Boston, is really strong. So the current play, I usually try to break it down as a current play, and what I'm going to do with the current, and then try to figure out the wind. The wind's the hardest to figure out, especially when it's light. The windier it gets, the easier it is to figure out. The only thing you can kind of rely on is trends, and trends are a northwester. You know it's probably going to be an oscillating breeze, although it can just go over to 335 for a while and stay there, and it can go over to 270 a while and stay there. But you do know that it's probably going to come back eventually. So northwester, you can play trends. On a southwester, you pretty much know it's going to kind of waffle through a range, and it's not going to, it's trying to go to 235 and stay there. It might be 220, it might be 240, but for the most part, it's going to be in that 230 range. So southwester is not too hard to sail in Marblehead. Southeaster, with the sea breeze, if there is a sea breeze in Marblehead anymore, which always seems to be trying to come in on every Wednesday night, never quite get there. Gets about halfway down the beat. But the sea breeze is probably the most challenging because it can come in from every which direction. I think the fact that Cape Cod's been built up so much in past years and the whole South Shore is the sea breeze is a little bit anemic. So it's harder to predict. I used to, I don't think anybody's actually, there's many places I go around the country where they the sea breeze comes in from this direction. Well, Marblehead, I've been here for now, 50 years. I still haven't really figured out what that direction is. But I do know that it generally starts a little more left and tries to work right. Now, what that left number is hard to say, but anywhere from 90, and it might settle in at 180. But I've never really nailed that down anywhere in that 90-degree range, which one is works. I don't know if that helps you out much. I can tell you this, though, on a northeaster, I think they're also a little more predictable. Northeasters tend to be just kind of a high-pressure driven wind, and a northeaster tends to waffle around a 10 or 15 degree range. A little bit randomly, but you just want to get the numbers and kind of get a feel for it. But pretty much when you're in a high-pressure gradient wind, it's just kind of do it like it does any easterly or northeasterly around the East Coast, so it just kind of waffles around a 10-degree range. You pretty much can count it going back and forth. So the hardest one of all would be that southeaster direction from 190 to 180. I can't help you much more than that. I don't know if these guys have any ideas.
Thank God Judd doesn't know what's going on.
I sailed the Star Worlds here in a breeze like that, and I thought I had the inside knowledge, and I was wrong with anybody that was coming from Brazil or wherever they were coming from. So I am so relieved to hear that Judd doesn't know which way it's coming from either. I thought it was just me all these years. The sea breeze here was extremely unpredictable, and I found it that way, but God, what a relief. Thanks, but that was great.
A very broad question. track racing? How are you?
You end up sailing a lot more on your own, and you really a mixed fleet like that where people have different ratings, different boat speeds. You want to make sure that you do not key on boat out there. I find that what happens is you'll have competition near you that you find important. And it's very important to realize that there's boats all over the race course, and as much as it could be 10 or 15 minutes behind you or in front of you that are racing against you. You might be having a much closer race with that boat you can barely see than the one that's right next to you. It's very important to not key on the boat that's near you, because they don't matter. The boat that really matters is the one that's closest to you on time, and you don't know what boat that will be. So it's very important in PHRF or any other handicap rules is to sail the boat as best as you can. Keep on looking. It's the same thing that's true with a one-design boat, but it gets more confusing with a handicap fleet because you can lose sight of the fact that there are boats all over the place that you're racing against, and you may be even tied with them and you don't realize it at the time. So that's important, very important. It's a good question too.
We haven't talked a lot about current. I think it was mentioned once when you were setting up the start. But in Marblehead, I've noticed, especially recently, there seems to be more days than not where current ends up being a factor. And I'm wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about current at the start and maybe some tactics of it and around the marks.
Judd's probably going to have a better answer to this one than me, but I don't know what the hell the current does around here. And I didn't grow up here, so I've lived here for about 15 years, and I probably sailed here for about 10 years before that, on and off. But I think it was before the 98 Etchells Worlds, I went up to Judd and I said, so what does the current around here do? And he's like, I don't know. And so I wasn't sure whether he was having me on or not. I went to Dave Curtis and I said, hey Dave, what does the current do around here? He said, I don't know. Actually Dave came up with what sort of the rule of thumb that I actually live by now. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But if you look at a chart at the bottom out in the area where we race, it looks like it's all over the place. It's just rocks everywhere, and so when you look at the current out there, it's like it kind of runs in rivers. It's like you'll be in a lot of current, and then you won't be in much, and then you'll be in a lot, and it'll be coming from a different direction, and you won't be in much. And Dave said to me, just the trick is just to figure out whether you're in good current or bad current, and then behave accordingly. By watching the boats around you. So there'll be times when you're sailing along and all of a sudden the boat in front of you sails across a current line. You can see the current lines, you just don't know what's on either side. So if the boat in front of you sails across a current line and all of a sudden they start going, the wrong way, don't cross the current line, tack before you get to it. And that seems to actually work a lot of the time. It's, obviously from a big picture perspective, if the current's going left to right or right to left, you want to behave accordingly on the windward leg, and, make sure you don't get down current of the mark and end up screwing that up and end up hitting, obviously. But it's interesting around here in particular to try to figure out what current you're in and how to try to stay in it if it's good.
I think that those are good comments. There's only two other thoughts I have on current. They mostly affect light air. Current as a percentage of your speed is a bigger factor in light air. So there's two considerations on current. One at the starting line. So if the current's going down towards the leeward end, you want to avoid the leeward end because the whole fleet's going to get pushed down there, and it might open the window up at the weather end. And vice versa, if the current's going towards the boat, and it's pushing the fleet towards the boat, you don't want to try to fit in that. Well, everybody's trying to fit. I remember watching that. I was in the start last year at Race Week, and I got to watch the J105 start. And I couldn't believe how start after start, the current scenario is the same. Everybody's the same group of boats are trying to jam it at the weather end, and the current is pushing them up towards the boat. I'm like, they aren't all going to fit there. I don't know why they're doing this. They keep doing it, the same boats they're tacking around. I'm like, when are they going to figure this out? So that was just a fundamental rule. You got to. So as a rule, I'll look at where the current is at the start and say, Okay, it's going towards the cleaning boat, we're not starting anywhere near the cleaning boat, or it's going towards the pin, we're not starting near the pin. So that's just rule one. So that's a good thing to think about. And then in terms of the other effective current in light air, which is I think is a big one, and really light air, it affects your apparent wind, especially upwind, downwind and upwind. So if it's on your weather side, or even if you think it's behind us, it's like off our quarter, it's helping us, it's not helping, it's pushing you away from the apparent wind. So I call it the slow tack and the fast tack. And when it's anywhere on your weather side, even if it's behind your weather side, it's pushing you away from the wind, and it slows your boat speed down. Vice versa, that lee bow effect. The lee bow effect isn't the fact that the current's necessarily pushing your boat to weather, it's just helping your apparent wind. And that's why the lee bow effect works. And it's not a big factor. So I call it in light air, I call it the fast tack and the slow tack when I'm talking to the crew. They say, okay, we're on the fast tack, we're on the slow tack. I generally do try not to be on the slow tack in light air. I like to be on the slow tack and the pumps, because the current will have a big impact on my apparent wind.
Can you talk about weight in different conditions, weight placement?
Depends on the boat, of course. What are you asking about?
Well, say a 105. Just say, for example.
Anybody answer that one?
Jack and Judd aren't allowed to sell one of I think in general, the rule of thumb is, in light air and downwind, you want to reduce weight at surface, which is weight to leeward and forward. In the breeze, you want it back to maintain control. Anytime, and different classes have different rules about this. In the sonar, you can't do it. In the J24, you can. And in the big boat, for sure you can. But in light air, especially if there's any chop at all, everybody who you don't need on deck, down below. We're not going to do that on the 105. I don't even know whether it's legal on the 105, but it's certainly no fun. So we're not going to send anyone down there on the shooting star unless they're going to get a beer. But there are certain boats where it really matters to get everybody down on the cabin sole, and you don't need to do it the whole time. But it's in light air and lump, it's a pretty good place to have extraneous bodies.
I have a question on occasionally on some of our starts with maybe 3, 5, 6 boats, medium, heavy air, people are early, so they're running the line. How do you guys feel about port tacking the fleet? Port tack starts and then in general port tacks.
That's a loaded question, and that's a great question. It came up a little bit, but I brought it up a little bit less than once anything. But that reach, I call it the reach fest, where people are early for the start. Maybe they're early because the current's pushing them up the line. Maybe they're early because their timing's off. But they're early, and they feel like they're early, so they're released. They made an error, and they get in the reach vest. The way to protect yourself against the reachers is to either go past them on port, let them go by. And that's why the port approach works. And I'll touch upon that briefly. But to answer your question more specifically, I either let the reachers go by, and if they're with me or trying to roll me, or hopefully they're not that, or trying to dock me, it's a loser. There's no way to defend against that. So you have to stop them. So you have a choice. You can let them go by, or you stop them from doing that. But you can't get in a reach vest because it's a loser for everybody. So if I have the reachers, you've got, in other words, on the port approach, if you can't hook them, then go past them. Keep going. That would be my short answer to that question. Don't avoid the reach vest. It's a loser for everybody involved generally. One guy usually can survive it, usually fouling a bunch of people in the process, and later you kind of survive it. But that's my feeling on reach vest. It's a really, especially if someone's trying to duck you, put their bow underneath you to push you over. Not only are they going to have a crappy start guaranteed, but they're ending up pushing you down the line or pushing over the line. It's not a good thing. So the goal is to either hook them or let them go by.
Do any of you guys ever use the sail above the line approach and then duck it to the start?
If there's a lot of current, it's a great way to go. Because anytime you look at, anybody who's called a line on a committee boat will know anytime the current's flushing people off the line, I mean, there's plenty of room there for anybody to come down and, have started a boat length ahead of everybody if they just did a dip start. Dips, other than that scenario, dip starts are really scary. I mean, setting yourself up to windward of the starting line with less than a minute to go is kind of a recipe for disaster, especially if there's a lot of boats. You end up being that reacher. And I would actually, I sort of elaborate a little bit on Judd's point. I mean, I think, he said unless you can hook him, let him go by. I would say you can't hook him. I mean, I think you just let him go by. The guy who's reaching down the starting line with 30 seconds to go and he's on the line is going to completely wreck somebody's start. Guaranteed. Just try to make sure it's not yours. So just let him go by. Whatever you have to do, just encourage him to just keep going. Just, screw the guy a little further down. Please, not me. Don't try to hook him. Just let him go. And, the quicker, whatever you have to do, put the bow down, head up, bluff, whatever, just let him go by.
Yeah, way in the back.
Yeah, I was just sailing a bit out in California, and I kept hearing more talk. Tack or cross. A lot more influence on other boats. What's your thoughts in terms of trying to influence the other boats during the race?
Well, if you're the starboard tacker, and the other boat is asking you whether they want you to tack, whether they want the starboard tacker to make them tack or cross. What you do is, if you're the starboard tacker, is if you're happy on starboard, you say cross, and if you're thinking that you might want to start going in the other direction, you say tack, and you just yell back starboard tack, make them tack, and then tack away. The whole thing about starboard is you don't want to use starboard as like the whole deal. If you're a starboard tack boat, you might decide you want to keep on going on starboard, and in that case, you just say cross, cross, cross. You just let the other person go by. But it's very important sometimes to let the other person cross, even if they're not crossing if you're on starboard tack. Because, that keeps your air clear, you keep going the right direction. If you're the starboard tack boat, you can use that as a tactical advantage rather than a rules advantage. And the thing to use with starboard is using it as a tactical advantage is more important than using it as a rules advantage. So I was thinking of it that way.
When was the last time one of you was in the protest room?
I used to be in the protest room all the time. College nationals, team racing. We were in the semifinals, and I had 3 protests going to the semifinals, and I won them all. We got into the finals, and we won the race. And I thought protests were great. Over the years, I had a couple of protests. Big boats, I continued to do the same thing. I thought this was a great idea. The protest room wins races. And after a while, you find there's a lot of people out there that don't like you so much anymore. So it might be a good idea to maybe not use the rules that way. I found, you can lose friends and stuff like that. The deal with the protest room is, if you end up in the protest room, the deal is that both parties think they're right. They definitely do. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in the protest room in the first place. So therefore, your stories are going to be different. And both guys, or likely one guy, is going to think the other guy's the worst liar he's ever met in his entire life. And the fact is, the other guy isn't thinking he's the worst liar he's ever met in his entire life. He's thinking that he's telling the truth, because they're looking at the incident from different angles. And so it's always important to remember, when you go into a protest room, you're going to hear a different story from the other guy. Sometimes they are the liar. They are. But a lot of times, they're actually telling the truth. And it's from their perspective. And so if you get to the point where you get to the protest room, just you can expect anything. So it's better to settle it, but it also is good. You don't want to let people push you around. If it's a clear incident, you want to protest, you want to follow through. Because the only way to keep, it's really, I've seen a lot of distressing things with the younger kids sailing. They don't do a lot of follow through with the protest. If it's a real protest situation where somebody's really harmed you, you should follow through with it and make it happen. Because that's the only way people actually follow the rules. But you can expect in the room, the stories are going to be different than you expect. And don't let it bother you. Just stick with your guns.
Any other questions? All right. Wow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I have for these gentlemen a gift certificate that they can use however they like. Yeah, it's probably good for drinks somewhere. But before you guys say, so thank you very much. This has just been tremendous. I think the turnout shows a lot. We tried to videotape this. I don't know how it's going to come out, but if it comes out half decent, we're gonna put it up on the Fleet 5 website so that people can come back and visit it. Of course, then I'll be able to do it and see it for the first time. Before you guys go, Drew Slider would like to make an announcement.
Hi everyone, I'm Drew. We're hosting for Clean On Yacht Club a fundraiser. We're going to be showing the movie Morning Light, which is the Roy Disney movie of 15 young adults training and racing the Transpac race in the TP52. The movie is being shown on May 23rd.